Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today to be with you. As Pastor Sarah said, I am Rick Hoyme. I'm the Bishop of the Northwest Synod of Wisconsin. And I shared with her I'm having a little post-traumatic stress here because the last time I was in this room was on the day I was installed as your bishop. And it wasn't really a real stress-free day for me, so I'll be fine. But this is the first time I've been, well, actually I was here on a Wednesday night for worship during Lent, but I sneak in and sneak out. My first time to actually be with you and to thank all of you, the people of Trinity, as a congregation for hosting the Synod on that day last September. You were amazing hosts. All of the people of this church who ushered and served communion and greeted people, and your staff, I'm guessing you're probably not aware of the hours that they put into that day. And they just did an amazing job, and you are so blessed, and they are so blessed with you. So it's just great to be here. I usually like to say a few words about what a bishop does. I've been doing this almost about 10 and a half months now. The bishop in our job description is, I am the pastor of the synod. And that's kind of a complicated job description, even though it's very short. So it means that I am your pastor's pastor, but I'm also your pastor. And sometimes those things don't work well together. Most often they do. But we have 200 congregations in this synod, and I spend just about every Sunday doing just this. So today I'm here with you. Last week I was in Milltown. How many of you know where Milltown is? Wow! That's a lot. Anybody here from Milltown? Well, it could have happened. I got an email yesterday from a member of my former church. I served at Central in Chippewa Falls, and he told me that he says, I don't do Facebook, but he said, my wife said you were in Milltown last Sunday, and he's a retired guidance counselor. He said his first job out of college was in Milltown. He said he was there 1 year. And he shared a little story. I'll be real quick. He said he used to go to this place. He was single, and he'd go to this place to eat. And the eating area was here, and then there was a door here, and then there was a bar here. And the staff all knew there that if teachers came in and they liked to have beer, they'd sneak into the bar and bring the teacher a beer in the dining area, but it was always in a metal cup. So none of the locals knew that the teacher was drinking beer. So I get those stories all the time. But it's wonderful to be here. I'm so blessed to be your bishop. And that's enough about me. I do want to introduce my wife. Diana's here, and she's probably having a little post-traumatic stress as well. But you want to stand, honey? There she is. Yeah. There she is. Yeah. But I'm doing this like within an hour of home. We still live outside of Chippewa Falls. She usually comes with, for in this case, one of the worships. She's not staying for UFTA days. So it happens when you marry a German. She just does not quite gather the importance of those days. So anyway, as a Norwegian, to your Norwegians, happy post-17. Mai from yesterday and all that stuff. So enough of that. Jesus on the road to Emmaus. We can start the slides. There we go. That in this story there is a very simple message, that there is always hope. Always hope. There is a line as Jesus walks along with these two men on the evening of Easter Sunday, where he asks them what happened in Jerusalem today. And they begin to tell him the story about Jesus and about what had occurred that day, and then their reaction to what had occurred, even through the sort of rumors of the empty tomb. And in their retelling of the story to Jesus, there are these very short words where they said, We had hoped. We had hoped that this one was the Messiah who had come to redeem Israel. Next slide. What they're saying to Jesus was that we had hoped, but now we are hopeless. Now, I need you to help me here. I'm going to come down. Help me define the word hopeless. If you could think of another word, when you hear the word hopeless, give me another word that is almost the same. Anybody got a word? Raise your hand if you got one. Okay, despair. Good word. Futile. Ooh, it's a good word. Anybody else? Another word for hopeless. Yeah. Faithless. Ooh, good one. Okay. It won't happen. It's not like a word, but that's good enough. Yeah. It won't happen. Yeah. This is an interesting word in our language because when we see the word hopeless, what we see and what we hear is it's over. Basically, what we see and what we hear is hopeless means that there is no hope. Next slide. But that's not what the word is. Look at the word when we put a hyphen into it. Isn't that interesting? The word does not mean there's no hope. It means that there is less hope. And that's an important distinction. There's a big difference between having no hope and having less hope. There's a big, big difference. I have a saying, which some people don't like, but that's all right. Here's my saying. I stole this from somebody else. But it really helps me in my life. You ready for this? I do not have time for negative people. Now, isn't that a comforting word from your pastor? Or your pastor's pastor? I do not have time for negative people. Why? Because negative people suck the hope out of me. They drain the life from me. Now, I want you to just think about your own families. Brothers, sisters, moms, dads, kids, cousins, aunts, uncles. Do any of you have anybody in your family that you would describe as negative? Maybe just one or two? Huh? You know the kind of people where you're on your way home from being with them and you're just, oh, that was so hard. I don't want to do this. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. I have 3 older brothers, and I will not name any of them. But there's a couple of them that I would describe as negative people. All my brothers, all of our ancestors came from Norway. So 2 of my brothers somehow got that Norwegian gene of hopelessness and despair, all that stuff. And so they really are pretty negative people. So I have created a rule, and you can steal this one from me because it is life-giving. I very intentionally try to spend time with my brothers. They live all over the place. None of them are close. But since my mom died a few years ago, it's sort of my job to make sure we get together once in a while. But these 2 brothers, what I do is when I'm going to be with them, I invoke what I call the 2-hour rule. I will spend 2 hours with them. No more. It's very helpful. Remember this one. You know, and I spend 2 hours with them, and I listen to them, and I nod my head, and every once in a while I make very appropriate groaning noises as I hear about how terrible their lives are and how hopeless they are and how bad things are. And I just nod my head. I've given up trying to fix them. I've given up trying to help them. I just go, oh, that's terrible. You're kidding. Oh, hopeless. And at the end of 2 hours, I have an alarm that goes off, and I go home. Because hopeless people suck the life out of us. Last Sunday, after I was in Milltown, I drove over to the University of Minnesota hospitals on the U of M campus to see a good friend of mine who had surgery a little over a week ago. And whenever I go to that place, to the University of Minnesota hospitals, I start having flashbacks and memories because that place has had a big part in my wife and I, in our marriage and in our lives. And as I was walking from the parking ramp up to the main part of the hospital and getting ready to go through the doors, all of a sudden there it came. That memory from 35 years ago. When my wife and I were sitting in the doctor's office at the University of Minnesota, waiting to hear what the doctor would tell us, and the doctor looked at us and said these words: "You will never be able to have children. You will never be able to have children." And I remember, without even thinking, I reached over to take my wife's her hand, and I turned and I looked in her eyes, and in those eyes, those brown eyes, I saw this look of hopelessness. Just utter hopelessness. Next slide, please. I'm going to see if we have some younger folks here. Do you have any idea who that is? Do you? No? No? Let me see. Do you know who that is? No? That's okay. There's hope here. It's all right. You don't know? Yeah. Okay. Do you know who that is? Well, you do because you're old, but we're going to, yeah. You don't count. This guy's important. Okay? That's Ernest Hemingway. Many consider him one of the greatest American authors who have ever lived. Okay? You might want to learn about him sometime. There's a story that Ernest Hemingway once was challenged to write a short story. We don't know if this is true or not, but it's a great story. He was challenged to write a short story, 6 words or less. A short story of 6 words or less that could make people cry. Any of you heard this story? It's great. And he did. He took out a napkin. He was probably in a bar somewhere because that's where he hung out. He took out a napkin and a pen and he wrote these 6 words. For sale. Baby shoes. Never worn. For sale. Baby shoes. Never worn. Hopeless words. Utterly hopeless. After 10, 11 months in this call, I am often asked by pastors and people in the church, "Bishop, what's it like out there? How's the church doing?" And I guess if I could have a 6-word reply, it might be for sale. Baby shoes, never worn. It's not good out there. It's not good at all. Some would say it might be hopeless. For every Sunday I get to stand in front of a congregation like you, I think of one time last winter where I was in one of our smallest churches, I'm sure, where in that room there were 17 people. And they weren't worshiping in their church. They were worshiping a little building next door. Because from Christmas Eve to Easter, they moved from their church to this little building next door because they can't afford to heat their church. And they sit on folding chairs with carpet squares on them because then they're warmer, because it's cold in that room. And they play perhaps the most out-of-tune piano I have ever heard. And where the pastor told me later, in some of the keys, when they go down, they don't come back up. Because they don't have any money to tune it or to fix it. Next slide. This is a picture of one of my first call was to North Central Montana. And I had 3 congregations. I drove 72 miles every Sunday. This is the church in a little tiny town. I mean, I'm thinking population about 9. Called Hoagland, Montana. Any of you ever heard of that? Okay, you will. I'm going out there this summer because this little church is celebrating their 100th anniversary. And I want to be there with them to celebrate that. And frankly, for them to celebrate that their doors are still open. When I left there in 1982, they had 80 members. They would worship about 60 on every Sunday. Now they have about 25 people. And they don't know if there is any hope for their future. They don't know. It's that way all over the church in this country, where people gather on Sundays on folding chairs with carpet squares and pianos that hurt their ears, and they wonder what will happen. What is God going to do? And they don't know. One of my favorite movies is Shawshank Redemption. Now, I have to put this little note in here. I recommend you see it, but don't rent and see the real one because there's lots of bad words in it. All right? If you watch it on TV, they really cleaned it up. But it's not a movie for kids. Ironically, it's based on a short story, not from Ernest Hemingway, but from Stephen King. And it's the story of a man, the man you see on your left up there, Andy Dufresne, who was falsely imprisoned for murdering his wife, and his friend Red, who was correctly imprisoned for murdering someone when he was very young. And the story of their friendship, and the story of that imprisonment, and the story of the despair and hopelessness that comes to people who are in prisons, whether prisons of their lives or prisons that are physical like this. And it's a story of their relationship, but the most important part of the story is the title, The Shawshank Redemption. Because my favorite movies are always movies about redemption, because redemption's about hope. And in this scene that comes towards the end of the movie, when Red and Andy are sitting against the walls of the Shawshank prison, they're discussing whether there's any hope at all, or whether they're both going to die in that place. And there's a saying in the movie that we do have a choice. And the choice is this: you can get busy living, or you can get busy dying. Which one are you going to do? Get busy living or get busy dying? Shortly after this scene, Andy escapes from Shawshank. And he promised Red that if he ever got out of that place, and if Red ever got out of that place, the Red had to go to this field with a rock wall in the northern part of Maine and find a buried container. And in there would be a message for him. So after Andy escaped, Red, much to his surprise, was granted parole. And he went to that field, and he found that wall, and he found that container. And in that container were these words from his best friend, Andy. He says, "Red, remember, hope is a good thing. maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. Red, remember this. Hope is a good thing. Maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. On that Sunday morning, Jesus was raised from the dead, and there was an empty tomb. No good thing ever dies. And on that day, as they walked to the road to Emmaus, and the story was shared with Jesus, and Jesus opened their eyes, and they came to believe in that empty tomb. These men who had hoped again. You see, with hope, there is an empty tomb. With hope, there need not be an empty womb. And with hope, in no church does there ever have to be an empty room. Because hope never dies. People ask me, are you pessimistic? And I said, no, I am not. I can't be, because Jesus rose from the dead. Next slide. And as long as we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, there is always hope. Always. We were watching a movie one night a few years ago, my wife and I. And in the movie, there was a conversation going on where the characters were asking each other, what did you want to be when you grew up? My wife and I had been married probably 30 years at the time, and I realized with some guilt, she and I had never had that conversation. And so I looked over and I asked her, I said, hon, what did you want to be when you grew up? And she said, all I ever wanted to be was a mom. That's all. Just a mom. We have 2 girls, 33 and 27, and 2 grandchildren, 4 and 7 months. Because there's always